Truth behind the Spurs collapse. Nobody wanted to admit. What if I told you the biggest story coming out of San Antonio isn't that the Spurs are losing? It's that they keep proving they can win and somehow still walk away defeated. That's the part driving everyone crazy. Not the score, not the standings, not even the pressure. The real nightmare is that the Spurs have looked good enough to beat the New York Knicks in almost every game of this series. They've built leads, they've controlled stretches, they've forced New York onto the ropes. And yet, when the final minutes arrive, something keeps breaking. Now, for the first time, De'Aaron Fox is finally pulling back the curtain on what has really been happening behind the scenes. And what he revealed says more about the future of Victor Wembanyama and the Spurs than any box score ever could. Because this isn't a story about talent, it's a story about survival. It's a story about a young team learning the hardest lesson in professional basketball. And that lesson is costing them everything. Coming into the series, excitement around San Antonio was at an all-time high. Wembanyama had become one of the most feared players in the league. The Spurs were no longer viewed as a rebuilding team. They were viewed as a legitimate threat. The roster looked loaded with potential. Victor Wembanyama, De'Aaron Fox, Stephon Castle, Devin Vassell, Keldon Johnson, a mixture of elite talent, athleticism, and youthful confidence. For stretches of this series, they looked unstoppable. But playoff basketball has a cruel way of exposing weaknesses that the regular season can hide. And one weakness has haunted San Antonio over and over again. Closing. Not starting games, not building leads, closing them. Fox admitted something that should terrify Spurs fans. The team has repeatedly built double-digit leads. They've repeatedly put themselves in winning positions. Yet somehow, they're staring at a devastating deficit. Think about that for a second. Most teams fall behind because they're outmatched. Most teams lose because the opponent is clearly better. That hasn't been the case here. The Spurs have been right there, close enough to win, close enough to believe, close enough to make every collapse hurt even more. And that's where frustration starts turning into something much bigger. Doubt. Questions begin appearing. Can this young core actually handle championship pressure? Can Wembanyama lead a team through playoff adversity? Can the Spurs learn fast enough before opportunities disappear? Those questions are getting louder every day. But according to Fox, inside the locker room, nobody is running from the truth. They know exactly what the problem is. The scary part, knowing the problem and fixing it are two completely different things. Because every time San Antonio gains control, every time they create separation, every time it feels like they're finally about to take command, the game suddenly changes. And that's exactly where this story becomes even more fascinating. In the next chapter, we'll break down the shocking pattern that has repeated itself game after game, why the Knicks keep stealing victories from the jaws of defeat, and why many people inside the basketball world believe the Spurs are facing a much deeper problem than anyone originally realized. If you're watching right now, let us know where you're watching from. And if you believe the Spurs can still turn this around, comment one below. If you think the Knicks have already broken them mentally, comment 2. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications because the story is only getting started. The pattern that exposed San Antonio. The most dangerous part of this series for the Spurs is not that they lost, it's how they lost. Because one close defeat can be explained away. 2 can be called painful. But when the same collapse keeps happening again and again, it stops being bad luck and starts becoming an identity problem. That is what De'Aaron Fox was really pointing toward. San Antonio was not walking into these games looking overwhelmed. They were not getting run out of the gym. They were not standing around helpless while New York dominated from the opening tip. Nope. The Spurs were striking first. They were building leads. They were forcing the Knicks to adjust. And for long stretches, they looked like the team with more energy, more length, more upside, and more explosive potential. But then the game would reach that dangerous middle point. The moment after the lead had been built. The moment when a young team starts feeling comfortable. The moment when a veteran team starts getting serious, that is where everything changed. Fox made it clear the Spurs could get up 10, they could get up 15, they could create the advantage, but once they had it, the real game began. That single idea explains the entire series. Because playoff basketball does not reward the team that looks better for 20 minutes. It rewards the team that stays locked in when momentum punches back. And that is where the Knicks had the edge. New York did not panic when San Antonio built leads. They did not rush. They did not break their structure. They simply waited for the Spurs to make one mistake, then another, then another. A missed rotation, a late closeout, a rushed shot, a lost rebound, a communication breakdown. One small mistake became 2. 2 became a run. And suddenly, a Spurs lead that looked safe was gone. For San Antonio fans, that is the cruel part. The team was close enough to dream, close enough to believe this young core had arrived early, close enough to look like a real threat. But every close game became another reminder that talent opens the door, while discipline decides who walks through it. The Knicks understood that better. Jalen Brunson controlled pace. OG Anunoby brought defensive pressure. New York's veterans stayed patient. And while the Spurs were trying to survive the pressure, the Knicks were waiting to punish every loose possession. That is why Fox's frustration felt so real. He was not angry because the Spurs were helpless. He was angry because they were capable. And sometimes, losing when you are capable hurts more than losing when you are outmatched, because it means the opportunity was right there. And the San Antonio let it slip. Fox refused to hide behind excuses. What made De'Aaron Fox's reaction so powerful was not just what he said, it was what he refused to say. He refused to blame the refs. He refused to blame bad luck. He refused to say the Knicks simply got hot. He refused to make Wembanyama the scapegoat, and he refused to act like San Antonio's problems were impossible to fix. Instead, Fox put the responsibility directly where veteran leaders are supposed to put it, on the team. That matters, because after a painful playoff loss, players usually have easy escape routes. They can talk about missed shots, they can talk about tough calls, they can praise the other team and move on. They can turn a real problem into a soft answer. Fox did not do that. He talked about process, he talked about discipline, he talked about being in the right spots. He talked about how the Spurs were not consistently doing the things that winning teams do when the game gets tight. That is leadership, not the loud kind, not the dramatic kind, the honest kind. Fox understood something simple but brutal. Shots come and go. Some nights the ball falls, some nights it doesn't. But positioning, communication, and effort are choices. And in the second half of these games, San Antonio's choices were not strong enough. That is what made his words feel heavier. He was not saying the Spurs lacked talent. He was saying they lacked consistency. He was not saying the Knicks were unbeatable. He was saying the Knicks were more prepared for the hardest moments. And when Fox said, in his own way, that it was about them, that was the line that revealed everything. Because when a player says, it's about us, he is taking control of the story. He is saying the opponent did not steal something San Antonio had no power over. He is saying the Spurs had control, lost control, and now have to earn it back. That is painful, but it is also hopeful, because if the problem is inside your own locker room, then the solution can be there too. Fox knows that. He has seen enough basketball to understand the difference between a team that is finished and a team that is learning. And San Antonio looks like a team learning the hard way. Every collapsed lead becomes film. Every late game mistake becomes a lesson. Every painful possession becomes proof of what has to change. But the clock does not slow down for young teams. The playoffs do not wait for development. And that is why Fox's honesty carried so much weight. He was not just explaining a loss. He was warning the Spurs that potential means nothing if they cannot protect it. Wembanyama became the symbol of everything. Victor Wembanyama is the reason the Spurs believe, but he is also the reason the pressure feels so massive. That is the burden of being a franchise-changing player. When Wemby is on the floor, everything looks possible. His size changes shots before they even happen. His reach turns normal passing lanes into danger zone. His presence around the rim makes opponents hesitate in ways that never show up fully in the box score. He is not just another young star. He is the center of San Antonio's future. And because of that, every Spurs collapse becomes bigger than one game. It becomes a question about him. Is he ready? Can he carry this kind of pressure? Can he be the anchor of a deep playoff team right now? Or is this series exposing how much growing he still has to do? Those questions are unfair in some ways, but they are unavoidable. Because when a player is this gifted, the expectations arrive early. Too early, sometimes. People forget how young he still is. They forget how many playoff lessons usually take years to learn. They forget that even the greatest players in NBA history had to lose before they fully understood how to win. But the spotlight does not care about patience. And in this series, Wembanyama has lived inside that spotlight. Every defensive mistake gets magnified. Every emotional reaction gets discussed. Every moment of frustration becomes a headline. And that is where Fox's presence becomes so important. Fox is not just another scorer next to Wemby. He is supposed to be the veteran stabilizer, the guard who knows how to control tempo, calm the group, and make the right decision when the game becomes chaotic. But even Fox cannot do that alone, because the Spurs are not losing due to one player. They are losing because a young team is discovering that playoff basketball attacks your weakest habits. It attacks your patience. It attacks your communication. It attacks your emotion. And it attacks your ability to stay calm when the crowd, the clock, and the opponent all start closing in at once. Wemby may be the face of the future, but this series is teaching him that talent can make you special, while composure makes you dangerous. That is the next step. The Spurs already have the star. They already have the belief. They already have the flashes. Now they need the maturity to survive the moments when the game turns ugly. Because in the playoffs, greatness is not just about what you can do when everything feels easy. It is about who you become when everything starts falling apart. The Knicks knew exactly where to strike. The Knicks did not beat San Antonio by accident. They beat them with patience. That is what separates experienced teams from young, dangerous teams. Young teams want to finish the fight as soon as they feel momentum. Experienced teams understand that basketball is not won in one emotional burst. It is won by surviving runs, finding weak spots, and waiting for the opponent to blink. That is exactly what New York did. The Knicks never treated a Spurs lead like the end of the world. They treated it like information. They watched how San Antonio reacted when ahead. They watched who rushed shots. They watched which rotations came late. They watched how Wembanyama was positioned defensively. They watched how the Spurs handled 5-out spacing, late clock pressure, and second chance opportunities. Then they attacked, not always loudly, not always with a huge highlight. Sometimes it was just one offensive rebound, one open corner three, one Brunson drive that forced help, one extra pass, one Spurs defender half a step late. That is how veteran teams steal games. They do not need you to collapse all at once. They only need you to crack possession by possession. And once San Antonio started cracking, the Knicks kept pushing on the same spot. That is what made the series so painful to watch for Spurs fans. New York was not always more spectacular. They were not always more athletic. They were not always more talented. But they were more composed. And in playoff basketball, composure is a weapon. Jalen Brunson understood when to slow the game down. OG Anunoby understood how to apply defensive pressure without losing structure. The Knicks understood that if they could drag the Spurs into late-game execution, the advantage would shift. Because late-game basketball is different. The floor feels smaller. Every mistake feels louder. Every possession carries more weight. Young teams often start thinking instead of reacting. Veteran teams start hunting. That is what New York did. They hunted San Antonio's uncertainty. And every time the Spurs failed to extend a lead, the Knicks grew more confident. That confidence changed the emotional balance of the series. Early in games, San Antonio looked fearless. Late in games, New York looked certain. That is the difference Fox was talking about without needing to say it directly. The Spurs had enough talent to win stretches. The Knicks had enough discipline to win ending. And until San Antonio changes that, every lead they build will feel less like safety and more like a test waiting to happen. The young Spurs learned the cruelest lesson. There is a lesson every young NBA team eventually learns. Being ahead is not the same as being in control. The Spurs are learning that lesson in the most painful way possible. When you are young, a double-digit lead can feel like proof. Proof that your system works. Proof that your talent is real. Proof that the opponent cannot handle your energy. But in the playoffs, a lead is not proof. It is bait. Because the moment you get comfortable, the other team begins testing everything you believe about yourself. That is where Stephon Castle and the rest of San Antonio's young core enter the story. Castle understood the pattern too. The Spurs had leads. They controlled large parts of games, but when it came time to finish, they could not close the door. That is not a small detail. That is the entire difference between being a rising team and being a winning team. Rising teams impress people. Winning teams eliminate people. San Antonio is still somewhere in between. They have the talent to scare opponents. They have the length to disrupt elite offenses. They have the athleticism to change the pace of a game quickly. But when the final minutes arrive, the game stops being about potential. It becomes about trust. Can you trust the pass? Can you trust the rotation? Can you trust the shot selection? Can you trust the spacing? Can you trust every player to know exactly where he needs to be without hesitation? That is where young teams struggle. Not because they do not care, not because they are soft, but because winning under pressure requires habits that have been tested over and over. The Spurs are still building those habits, and the Knicks are exposing every unfinished part of that process. This is why Fox's role matters so much. He has to be more than a scorer. He has to be the bridge between San Antonio's future and the reality of playoff basketball right now. He has to keep Wembanyama focused. He has to help Castle grow. He has to steady the offense when the crowd gets loud. He has to make sure the Spurs do not panic when a lead shrinks. That is a heavy responsibility. But this is exactly why San Antonio brought him in. Because a young team with a superstar needs more than highlight. It needs a veteran voice that can turn chaos into order. And right now, the Spurs are finding out just how hard that really is. Why Fox still believes. Here is the strange thing about this series. The same reason the Spurs are frustrated is the same reason they still believe they were close. That is the emotional contradiction at the center of everything. If San Antonio had been blown out, the story would be simple. The Knicks were better. The Spurs were not ready. The gap was too large. But that is not what happened. The Spurs built leads, they competed, they had chances, they put themselves in position, and because of that, Fox's belief does not sound empty. It sounds rational. He is not saying San Antonio can come back because of some motivational speech. He is saying they can come back because they have already shown they can control major parts of these games that matters. Because belief without evidence is just hope. But belief with evidence becomes fuel. Fox has evidence. He has seen the Spurs defend at a high level. He has seen them build double-digit leads. He has seen Wembanyama change the geometry of the court. He has seen the Knicks pushed in a difficult moment. So when he says the team still believes, he is not ignoring reality. He is looking at reality from a different angle. The losses hurt because they were winnable. But the games being winnable also means the series is not impossible. That is the fine line. Fox is walking. Too much frustration, and the team falls apart. Too much blind optimism, and the team refuses to learn. Fox is trying to hold both truths at once. Yes, the Spurs failed. Yes, they are still capable. That is a veteran message. And he made one thing especially clear. They cannot think about winning 3 games at once. They cannot stare at the entire mountain. They have to win the next possession, then the next quarter, then the next game. That is how comebacks happen, not through panic, not through shortcuts, not through pretending the problem is smaller than it is. They happen when a team narrows its focus so tightly that the impossible starts becoming manageable. Fox knows the odds. He knows how hard it is to come back from a deep series deficit, but he also knows the Spurs are not as far away as the scoreboard suggests. That is what makes this moment so important, because if San Antonio truly believes the games are there to be won, then the next step is proving they can stop giving them away. The noise around San Antonio is getting louder. When a young team starts losing close games, the noise always gets louder. At first, people praise the fight. Then they question the composure. Then they start looking for someone to blame. That is where the Spurs are now. The national conversation is changing. Fans are asking if Wembanyama is being asked to carry too much too soon. Analysts are questioning whether San Antonio has enough late-game structure. Critics are wondering if Fox can be the veteran closer this young group needs. And inside that noise, the pressure keeps building. Because the Spurs are not just playing for one series. They are playing for the public image of their future. That is what makes this situation different. When an older team loses close games, people talk about missed opportunities. When a young team loses close games, people talk about identity. Are they tough enough? Are they mature enough? Are they ready for the stage? Are they built correctly? Those questions can become heavy, and Fox knows better than to let them inside the locker room. That is why his response to outside criticism mattered. He made it clear that the noise does not matter if it does not help them win the next game. That sounds simple, but for a young team under national attention, it is not simple at all. Players hear things. They see clips. They feel the shift in fan energy. They know when the story around them is changing. And if they are not careful, outside noise becomes internal doubt. Fox is trying to prevent that. He is trying to keep the Spurs focused on the only thing that can actually help them. Fin! Adjustments, execution, discipline. The next game, that is the right mindset, but mindset alone will not win. At some point, the Spurs have to turn lessons into results because patience from fans has limits, especially when the team has Wembanyama. Superstars accelerate expectations. Nobody wants to hear young team forever when the centerpiece looks like a generational player. That is the challenge San Antonio now faces. They have to develop while being judged. They have to learn while being watched. They have to grow while the entire NBA world debates whether they are ready. And that kind of pressure can either sharpen a team or split it open. The next game will reveal which direction the Spurs are heading. Talent is no longer enough. This is the point in the story where the Spurs have to face the truth. Talent got them here. Talent will not save them now. That is the brutal difference between regular season promise and playoff reality. During the season, talent can overwhelm teams. Length can create chaos. Athleticism can erase mistakes. A superstar like Wembanyama can make ordinary possessions feel extraordinary. But in a playoff series, the opponent sees you again and again. They study you. They adjust. They learn your habits. They learn which players hesitate. They learn which actions make your defense rotate late. They learn when your offense gets rushed. By game 4, nothing is hidden, and that is when talent has to be joined by execution. For San Antonio, that is the missing piece. They are talented enough to build leads. They are not yet disciplined enough to protect them. That is why this series feels like a turning point. Because the Spurs can no longer be satisfied with being exciting. They can no longer walk away saying, at least we competed. Competing is not the goal anymore. Winning is. That shift is uncomfortable for young teams. It removes excuses. It turns potential into pressure. It forces everyone in the locker room to grow up faster. Wembanyama has to become not only a defensive force, but an emotional anchor. Fox has to become not only a veteran scorer, but the steady hand in every late-game storm. Castle and the young players have to understand that one loose possession in April or May can undo 40 minutes of great basketball. That is the level they are entering. The Spurs are not far away, but being close is its own kind of danger. Because close can make a team feel satisfied. Close can trick a team into thinking time will fix everything. Close can hide the urgency. Fox seems to understand that. His message was not comfort. It was accountability. He knows the Spurs have a chance, but he also knows chances disappear when teams refuse to correct the same mistake. That is what San Antonio must decide now. Will this series become the painful beginning of something great, or will it become the warning sign they ignore? The answer depends on whether the Spurs can finally do the one thing they have failed to do all series: finish. The lesson San Antonio cannot afford to waste. The final lesson from this series is not that the Spurs are broken. It is that they are being tested earlier than expected. And sometimes, the most important tests do not arrive when a team feels ready. They arrive when a team is still young, still emotional, still learning, and still trying to understand what winning actually demands. That is where San Antonio stands now. This team has the foundation. Victor Wembanyama gives them a defensive identity that most franchises would dream of building around. De'Aaron Fox gives them a veteran voice, a creator, and someone who understands how quickly momentum can turn in playoff basketball. Stephon Castle and the young core give them energy, growth, and long-term promise. But the next step is no longer about potential. It is about standard. The Spurs must learn that every possession matters. Not as a slogan, as a reality. A lazy closeout matters. A missed box out matters. A rushed shot matters. A bad communication moment matters. A 2-minute stretch without discipline can erase an entire night of good basketball. That is the strategic lesson. San Antonio does not need to become a completely different team. They need to become a more mature version of themselves. They need to extend leads instead of protecting them nervously. They need to stay aggressive without becoming careless. They need to trust their structure when the opponent makes a run. They need to understand that pressure is not a reason to panic. It is the price of becoming great. And for Wembanyama, this may be one of the most important moments of his young career. Not because it defines him forever, it does not, but because it can shape how he leads from here. Great players are not built only by highlights and awards. They are built by painful nights, honest film sessions, public criticism, and the quiet decision to come back better instead of becoming bitter. That is the human lesson too. Losing can either create blame or growth. A team can turn on each other, or they can turn toward the work. Fox chose accountability. That matters, because peace inside a locker room does not mean avoiding hard conversations. It means telling the truth without destroying trust. The Spurs need that now. They need honesty. They need patience. They need unity. And they need to remember that a painful loss is not the end of a story unless you allow it to become one. So, whether San Antonio comes back in this series or not, the message is clear. The future is still there. But the future will not wait forever. The Spurs must earn it possession by possession, game by game, lesson by lesson. If you believe Wembanyama and the Spurs will grow from this and come back stronger, comment 1 below. If you think this series exposed a problem they cannot fix yet, comment 2. And if you enjoyed this breakdown, make sure to like the video, share it with another NBA fan, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss the next story.